she was never meant to play. It started as a cruel joke, forcing a humble woman to sit at the grand piano. They laughed, expecting clumsy notes, a spectacle of embarrassment. But when her fingers touched the keys, the laughter died. The room fell silent. The music that followed was unlike anything they had ever heard, beautiful, haunting, and wrong. Then the piano played on its own. The candles flickered. The walls seemed to breathe. And then, the screaming began. What did she awaken that night? Why did the guests vanish without a trace? And most chilling of all, why is the piano still playing? Watch till the end, because some songs are never meant to be played. It was a quiet evening at the grand estate, with only the flicker of candlelight illuminating the ornate room. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and velvet drapes. A small gathering of guests sat around a lavishly decorated table, their voices a soft murmur. They were all there for a celebration. At least, that was what they had been told. But there was an undercurrent of tension, a strange chill that no one seemed willing to acknowledge. Among them sat Alice, a humble woman with a quiet demeanor and simple dress. She had been invited by a distant cousin, someone she barely knew, but she had accepted, eager for the chance to meet new people. The laughter of the group grew louder, but it felt forced, as if they were all playing roles. The host, a wealthy businessman with a cruel smile, leaned in toward Alice. "Play something for us," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Why not show us your talent?" he added, glancing around the room with a knowing grin. Alice froze. She had never been asked to perform like this before. Her fingers tingled with anxiety, the fear of embarrassment creeping up her spine. She glanced at the piano in the corner of the room, its black keys gleaming under the dim light. The guests snickered, clearly enjoying the discomfort they had caused her. But Alice had no choice. She walked to the piano, each step echoing in the silence. As she sat down, she could feel the weight of all eyes upon her, burning into the back of her neck. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. Then, she took a deep breath and began. At first, the notes were hesitant, unsure. But as she played, something shifted. The melody began to flow, smooth and haunting. Her hands danced across the keys with grace, as if they were no longer her own. The room fell silent, the once mocking laughter replaced by an eerie stillness. The air thickened again, but this time with awe, not discomfort. Alice's music seemed to pull them in, drawing them deeper into a trance-like state. She was no longer the humble woman they had mocked. Now, she was the one in control, the one who commanded the room. The sound of the piano filled the space, rich and full, echoing off the walls. Each note seemed to carry a weight of its own, heavy and laden with emotion. The guests, who moments before had been so quick to judge, were now captivated. It was as if the music had unlocked something within them, something they hadn't even known existed. Alice felt the power of the moment, the thrill of turning the tables. But just as the final chord reverberated through the room, something changed. The once warm atmosphere grew cold, a chilling sensation creeping along her skin. The host's grin faded, his eyes narrowing as he stared at her with growing unease. Alice paused, her fingers still resting on the keys. Something was wrong. The other guests were no longer applauding. Instead, they seemed unsettled. The flickering candlelight cast strange shadows against the walls, as if the room itself was alive, watching her. Alice's breath quickened. She could feel the weight of their gaze upon her, but it was different now. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't appreciation. It was fear. The host stood up abruptly, his face pale. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp. But Alice couldn't stop. The music had taken over. Her fingers moved on their own, faster now, more urgent, as if the piano itself was calling her. The guests recoiled, some stepping back from their seats. A cold breeze swept through the room, despite the windows being shut tight. It was as if the very air had changed, thickened with an unseen presence. Alice's heart raced, but her hands never faltered. The room, once full of laughter and light, had transformed. Now it was filled with something far darker. A sound echoed from the depths of the piano, a low, eerie hum that no one had heard before. And then it stopped. Alice's hands froze. The room was utterly silent. She slowly turned to face the guests, their expressions twisted in terror. They were no longer the same people who had mocked her. They were pale, wide-eyed, and trembling. Something had happened, something she couldn't explain. But she knew one thing. She had played a different kind of tune. The silence in the room was suffocating. Alice's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The weight of the moment pressed against her, cold and unrelenting. She glanced at her hands, still hovering over the keys. They were shaking. The piano felt different beneath her fingers, as if it were something alive, something breathing. The guests had not moved. Their eyes were locked on her, their faces pale and drained of all color. The host, who had once mocked her with such confidence, now looked as if he had seen something impossible. His lips parted, but no words came out. Alice swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. What is wrong?" No one answered. The only sound was the faint crackling of the candles, their flames flickering wildly, as if disturbed by an unseen wind. Then, slowly, one of the guests, a woman with trembling hands, lifted her arm and pointed. Not at Alice. At the piano. Alice turned back, her heart pounding. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The polished surface of the instrument gleamed under the dim light. The keys, the same ones she had just touched, sat still and lifeless. But then, a single note played. Soft. Hollow. Alice flinched. Her hands were nowhere near the keys. The note hung in the air, stretching longer than it should have, vibrating with something unnatural. The guests gasped, stepping back, their fear now palpable. Alice's breathing grew ragged. She wanted to stand, to run, but something held her in place. A presence. Something unseen, yet undeniably there. The air around her grew colder, prickling her skin with an icy touch. Then, the piano played again. Not a single note this time. A melody. Slow. Haunting. The same melody Alice had just performed. But it was different. Darker. As if something beneath the surface of the music had shifted, twisted into something wrong. Alice gripped the edges of the bench, her knuckles turning white. The host staggered backward, shaking his head violently. "This is a trick," he rasped, though his voice lacked conviction. Alice wished it were. But she could feel it now. A presence within the music. A whisper beneath the notes. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence fell once more, heavier than before. Alice turned to the guests, searching their faces for answers, for an explanation. But all she saw was terror. A deep, bone-chilling terror that mirrored her own. Then, the piano lid slammed shut. Hard. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot, making everyone jump. Alice stumbled to her feet, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The host's face contorted in something between fear and rage. "You should not have played," he whispered. Alice swallowed. "What do you mean?" His eyes darted to the piano, then back to her. His voice was barely audible. "There are things in this house that should remain undisturbed." A cold dread settled in Alice's stomach. The flickering candlelight cast strange, twisting shadows on the walls. The air felt different now, as if something was watching, waiting. And then, the piano played one final note, louder than before, a sound that did not belong in this world. The note rang through the room, deep and unnatural, vibrating through the very walls. Alice clutched her chest, the sound sinking into her bones like a voice from another world. The guests flinched, some covering their ears, their faces twisted in horror. The host staggered back, his breath shallow. No, this cannot be happening," he muttered. Alice turned to him, her voice unsteady. "What is this?" He did not answer. Instead, he backed away, his eyes locked on the piano as if it would lunge at him. The note lingered, stretching beyond the limits of sound, growing heavier, deeper. Then, the room shuddered. A soft tremor at first, barely noticeable. then stronger. The chandelier above swayed, its crystals clinking together in a ghostly chime. The candles flickered wildly, their flames bending unnaturally, as if pulled by unseen hands. The air thickened, pressing against Alice's skin, seeping into her lungs. She could feel it now. Something was here. Something that had been waiting. A whisper slid through the air, brushing against her ears, but the words were lost, too faint to understand. Alice's breath hitched. The guests huddled together, their fear merging into something almost tangible. The host reached for a candle and threw it toward the piano. The flame flickered in the air, then went out before it touched the wood. Alice's stomach twisted. The piano sat still, silent, but she could feel it watching, waiting. Then, a key pressed down. Slow, deliberate. A deep, echoing note that seemed to come from the heart of the house itself. The sound clawed through the air, thick with something ancient, something wrong. The shadows along the walls twisted, stretching unnaturally, bending in ways that defied reason. Alice took a step back, her pulse hammering in her ears. The host's voice shook. "This is not a game." Alice swallowed hard, unable to look away. The piano hummed, a sound too low to be heard, but felt in the marrow of her bones. The air grew colder still. Then the whispers returned. But this time, they were louder. And they were calling her name. Alice's breath hitched. Her name slithered through the air, hushed voices overlapping, weaving together like a melody gone wrong. Alice. Alice. Each whisper came from a different direction, yet the source remained unseen. She turned, frantic, searching the faces of the guests. Their eyes were wide, their mouths shut tight. None of them had spoken. The host's face was ashen, his hands clenched at his sides. The shadows on the walls twisted again, stretching unnaturally, curling toward her like fingers reaching through the dark. The floor beneath her feet felt unsteady, as if the house itself was shifting, breathing. Alice took another step back, and the piano screamed. A hideous, discordant clash of notes exploded from the keys, an eruption of sound that sent the guests reeling. Alice clapped her hands over her ears, but the noise pressed in, relentless, vibrating through her skull. The chandelier above swung violently, its crystals shattering as they hit the ceiling and floor. The walls groaned, the wood stretching, straining. The whispers turned into wails. Long, mournful, agonized wails that filled the space between the broken notes. The host fell to his knees, gripping his head. "You have awakened it," he choked out. Alice gasped, trying to move, but her feet would not obey. She was rooted to the spot, trapped in the grip of something unseen, something ancient. The piano keys rattled, pressing down in rapid succession, playing a melody she had never heard before, yet somehow new. It clawed at the edges of her memory, a song buried deep, long forgotten. The wails turned into whispers again, but this time, the voices were clearer. Not just calling her name, begging, pleading, play. The word curled through the air, thick and heavy, sinking into her skin. Play. Her fingers twitched. The piano waited. The guests sobbed, some retreating toward the door, but none dared to leave. The host looked up, his face stricken with horror. "Do not touch it," he rasped. Alice's hands moved on their own. Her fingers brushed the keys, the cool ivory burning against her skin. The moment she pressed down, the candles blew out. The room plunged into darkness. And the screaming began. The screams tore through the darkness, raw and unearthly. Alice's body stiffened as the sound wrapped around her, sinking into her bones like ice. She could not see. She could not breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on her like unseen hands. Then, the piano came alive. The keys pounded in a furious rhythm, hammering out a melody that did not belong in this world. The notes clashed and shrieked, each one sending a violent tremor through the room. Alice's fingers moved without her consent, locked in place, forced to play. The guests sobbed, their shapes barely visible in the suffocating darkness. Shadows slithered across the walls, no longer confined to the edges of the room. They stretched and coiled like living things, creeping toward the terrified onlookers. The host's voice broke through the chaos, hoarse and desperate. "You do not know what you are doing." Alice wanted to stop. She tried to pull away, but the piano held her. The music surged, growing louder, faster. And with it, the shadows grew bolder. They rose from the corners of the room, towering over the guests, their forms flickering and shifting. One of the guests let out a strangled gasp as something cold brushed against her cheek. Another staggered back, only to be swallowed by the darkness. A cry cut short. Alice's heart slammed against her ribs. The music would not stop. The piano would not let her go. Something unseen gripped her wrists, forcing them down onto the keys. The melody twisted, bending into something grotesque. And then, a new sound joined the music. Laughter. Low. Hollow. It slithered through the air, curling around her ears. Alice's breath hitched. It was coming from the piano. A voice hidden beneath the music, rising with every note she played. The laughter grew, rippling through the room, echoing from the very walls. The host lurched forward, his face contorted in terror. "Stop," he screamed. Alice could not. The piano owned her now. The darkness swelled, pulsing like a living thing, its tendrils reaching for the last of the guests. Another scream, distant, fading, then gone. Alice felt it, the moment their presence was swallowed whole. The piano roared, the melody peaking, the final notes slamming into place with a force that rattled the walls. And then, silence. A deep, hollow silence that pressed into Alice's ears, ringing in the absence of sound. Her hands slipped from the keys. Her body trembled, free from the unseen grip, yet she could not move. The darkness lingered, thick and waiting. Alice's pulse pounded as her vision adjusted. She turned, scanning the room, and her stomach dropped. The guests were gone. The host stood alone, shaking, his face a mask of disbelief. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Alice looked back at the piano. The keys were still, but she could feel it watching her, waiting. And then, the laughter returned. Not from the piano. From behind her. A cold breath brushed against Alice's neck. Her body locked in place, muscles rigid, her skin crawling with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The laughter slithered through the air, low, breathy, teasing. Not human. Slowly, her eyes darted to the host. He was frozen, staring past her, his pupils blown wide with terror. His lips trembled, forming silent words, but no sound escaped. The laughter grew louder. Alice felt it ripple down her spine, curling around her ribs like unseen fingers. She wanted to turn. She needed to see what stood behind her. But something deep inside her screamed, "Do not look." The air pressed against her, thick with an energy she could not explain. The room no longer felt like the same lavish space where this nightmare had begun. The walls seemed farther away, stretched into endless darkness. The chandelier hung still now, as if time itself had paused. Only the piano remained unchanged. And the thing behind her. The host's throat bobbed, his voice barely a whisper. "Do not move." Alice's breath hitched. The unseen presence loomed closer. A slow, deliberate step. Another. The wooden floor groaned beneath its weight. Alice clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. The whispers returned. But this time they were not calling her name. They were humming. The same melody she had played, but warped, distorted, like a voice singing through cracked lips. The host took a shaky step back. Alice could see the sweat on his brow, the way his body trembled. His gaze never left the space just beyond her shoulder. Then, the whispering stopped, the humming ceased, and a single, ice-cold fingertip traced the length of Alice's spine. She gasped, and the room collapsed. The walls twisted, bending inward, the ceiling stretching, pulling, warping. The piano let out a sound, low, resonant, vibrating through the floor. Not music. A pulse. A heartbeat. Alice's vision blurred as the space around her shifted. The furniture stretched like melting wax. The candles flickered in and out of existence. The host's form wavered, his terrified expression dissolving into shadows. The air turned thick, cloying, pressing against her skin. She was no longer in the grand estate. She was nowhere. Only the piano remained, glowing faintly in the darkness. And then, the laughter returned. This time, it was everywhere. Alice's breath came in shallow gasps. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating, wrapping around her like a second skin. The laughter echoed from all sides, shifting in tone, mocking, delighted, hungry. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus. The piano still sat before her, untouched, waiting. The laughter faded into a whisper. A voice, clear and cold. "You played so beautifully." Alice swallowed hard. She did not dare to speak. The air crackled, charged with unseen energy. The shadows around her pulsed, twisting and writhing like living things. Then, a single note rang out from the piano. Soft. Hollow. A call. Alice's fingers twitched. The presence around her shifted. Waiting. Daring. The voice hummed the melody once more, slow and deliberate. A command. Alice took a shaky step forward, her legs weak beneath her. The piano bench remained empty. She knew, deep in her bones, that if she sat down again, she would never leave. The realization hit her like ice in her veins. She had to end this. Now. Alice took another step and turned away from the piano. The laughter faltered. A ripple of unease passed through the darkness, the very air growing still. Alice ran. The shadows reached for her, stretching like grasping hands. She stumbled, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. A shriek tore through the space, high and unnatural. The voice from the darkness snarled, "You cannot leave." Alice pushed forward, forcing herself toward the nothingness ahead. The ground beneath her feet cracked and groaned. The unseen presence lunged, cold fingers brushing her skin. Then, a burst of light. Blinding. The world snapped back into place. Alice fell forward, hitting solid ground with a gasp. The scent of candle wax and aged wood filled her senses. She was back. The grand room stood still and quiet, bathed in warm, flickering light. The guests were gone. The host was gone. The only thing left was the piano. Silent. Waiting. Alice rose to unsteady feet, her breath ragged. The house around her was different now. It no longer breathed, no longer whispered. The shadows had receded, lurking just beyond the edges of the candlelight. Alice stepped back. She would not stay. She turned toward the door, her fingers trembling as they gripped the handle. But before she could leave, a single note played behind her. Soft. Hollow. Alice did not turn back. She stepped out into the night, the heavy door shutting behind her. The air outside was crisp, clean, free. She exhaled, shaking. Then, from deep within the house, the piano began to play again. A song she did not finish. A song that would never end.